Well, Jamar and Olivia are great examples of why this work is so important. Let's give them another round of applause. Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, a man with an astonishing story that will inspire and motivate. Hadi Partovi is the founder and CEO of Code.org. And just so you know, we will have questions and answers after his remarks, so please use your phones to send in the questions the way you did the last time. Hadi?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. This is my first time in Iowa, so I just visited the state's capital. I'm so happy to be here with you all. I usually start all of my presentations with a personal story about myself and my life story. This is myself with my twin brother growing up. Unlike most of you, I didn't grow up in the United States. I actually was born initially in the Middle East, in Iran. And this was roughly when this picture was taken. Our country broke out into a revolution and a war with the neighboring country of Iraq. And so I actually spent most of my childhood in a basement every evening with my hands in my ears, hoping our home wouldn't get hit by the bombs, which is basically one of the worst ways to grow up. But my life really changed when my dad one day brought home a magical gift. He brought us, my brother and I, a Commodore 64. Now, this wasn't the magical gift because it didn't have any games or apps on it. He also gave us a book on computer programming and helped teach my brother and I coding and computer programming starting from when we were about 8 or 9 years old. So by the time we immigrated to the United States as immigrants, our family had very little to our names, but my brother and I had gotten so good at coding that even when we were 14 years old, we started getting sort of under-the-table internships at tech companies, and I've now had a fantastic career in tech. And the reason I started Code.org really is to be able to give back, and also because I realized most kids are not going to learn coding and computer science from their mom or dad, because most kids' mom and dads didn't learn this in the first place. I feel like I'm living the American dream, and at the same time, our country needs to think about what the American dream looks like in the 21st century. You know, the American dream used to be about going out west and building a log cabin and panning for gold, but that's not really what it's about anymore. It's now really more of a global idea about opportunity, that if you work hard and if you study hard, you can build a better life for yourself or for your children. And if you think about what the American dream looks like today, it doesn't feel like it's working for most people. And we're on the threshold of an even greater amount of change in terms of opportunity in the United States. If you think about the future of work, we're in a major time of change. Consider, for example, the job of a cashier. There's about 3 million people working at cash registers in the United States. Meanwhile, all of the largest retailers like Walmart, Amazon, McDonald's, Arby's have all talked about automating the work of the cash register. There's about 3 million truck drivers in the United States, and meanwhile, all the major truck manufacturers are looking into making self-driving trucks that drive themselves. Within manufacturing, the #1 type of job opening isn't for plant workers or production workers, it's for software engineers to automate that work. Even in food preparation, there's now companies that are working on building robots that make food. Every one of these job types represents 3 million jobs in this country that are being automated. If you think about technology's impact on our workforce, we're on a path to change a lot. If you consider today's workforce, Forrester claims that in just 8 years, about 10% of all jobs will get automated. McKinsey predicts that within 15 years, it'll be close to 30% of all jobs, and Gartner predicts that in less than 30 years, more than half of all jobs are going to be replaced by technology. And we hear all these stories, there's big numbers, half of all jobs, but it feels kind of far away. But this change is happening right now. And it's not just low-paying jobs. Consider the work of a patent attorney, which is a pretty high-paying job. That patent attorney is spending time looking through the past history of inventions to look at a past invention that matches a current patent application. That patent search increasingly can become automated and cause that high-paying job also to go away. Or if you consider the work of a radiologist, which is, again, a high-paying job, not a low-paying job, radiologists, pretty much in the next 10 years, all of them are going to be out of work. Just in the last year, just a few months ago, the National Institute of Health released 100,000 images of x-rays, labeling which ones have pneumonia and which ones don't have pneumonia. And in just 6 weeks, Stanford researchers applied a machine learning algorithm to automate the work of detecting pneumonia, and their algorithm works better than any radiologist. And I mention that because if you're planning a career in radiology, that career is not going to exist anymore. But at the same time, when you think about this, this represents the double-edged sword of technology. Because on the one hand, careers in radiology are going away. On the other hand, we'll be able to detect diseases more accurately and more quickly and more cheaply. Consider the story of Joshua Osborne. This is a boy whose family went to visit Florida for about a week. About a month after the visit, he had a bad headache, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor did what all doctors do. He looked in the boy's eyes, looked in his ears, looked in his mouth, said, "You have a headache, here's some Advil, go home and rest." Now, for most headaches, that's the right thing to say. In Joshua's case, 2 days later, he was in a coma, came back to the hospital saying, "All right, the rest didn't help." And then doctors spent an entire month and $2 million of tests trying to figure out why this kid was in a coma. After a month and $2 million spent, they gave up on Joshua. A nearby computer science laboratory said, "Can we take a look at the genes of what's inside his blood to see if we can use computers to take a look?" And so they took a small blood sample, ran it through a gene sequencer to get all the genes that were of whatever was in his blood, and then ran some code to remove whatever was human DNA from his blood to see what else was in there. In 24 hours, they identified the foreign organism, sent a prescription back to the hospital. 2 days later, Joshua was walking and fine, basically a healed person. And this took way less time than the $2 million of testing. And my point to this story is technology isn't just going to take away jobs, it's going to change jobs and has a real opportunity to make our world much better and healthier. If you think about agriculture, technology has changed agriculture a lot, but what you see here is a modern tractor kind of device that is continuously using those robots at the back of the tractor to basically scan the plants it's going over and applying personalized treatment for each plant based on how it's doing. And these kinds of devices can improve the yields on crops for us. If you consider home construction, you may have seen this just a month ago. A company announced this home was built not by people, but by one giant large 3D printer that basically printed the home. It costs $10,000 only to build a house in 24 hours. Now, that home might not be the best and fanciest home you can get, but when you consider that over 1 billion people in the world don't even have homes, this is going to provide much more affordable housing. It's also going to cause a lot of changes in what the construction industry is going to look like. When you think about self-driving cars, on the one hand, there's this fear of truck drivers going out of business. On the other hand, we have about 3 million injuries a year, costing $33 billion a year and 37,000 lives getting lost. And self-driving cars have the promise of preventing those kinds of things. So the reality is that there's a lot of pluses and minuses to the way technology is changing the workforce of the future. One thing we can all look back just from history to know is that more automation doesn't just take away jobs, it increases productivity. For example, when the loom was invented, there was a lot of people freaking out about jobs being lost. Every weaver was eventually put out of business, but now we can all afford clothing, which is not something that it was true before. When the automobile was invented, people lamented the loss of jobs in the world of taking care of horses. And almost all the horse-carrying jobs in the country have disappeared. You know, being a farrier to put horseshoes on horses used to be a big, big job. It's now a very sort of small job. But meanwhile, there's all these industries that have been created in terms of making highways and just the changes into how retail works and malls and so on. In agriculture, the rise of industrial agriculture completely changed the US economy. 100 years ago, half of all Americans worked on farms, half. And just farming alone caused half of all jobs to effectively be destroyed or changed. And as America, we've managed to cope with that, a change in half of all jobs. So when you think about the technology change that we're going to be going through in the next 30 years, we've gone through this before. Half of all jobs were removed by industrial agriculture. Another half are going to be removed by the next wave of technology. The real question is, what are we going to do about it to prepare for this? Because each one of these changes also involves some degree of stress on people's lives. You know, we're going to cope as a human race or as a population, but we can look ahead and prepare for that. The trillion-dollar question is, what are the jobs of the future going to look like? And you don't need a crystal ball to figure this out. All you need to look at is the last 15 years. If you look at the history of opportunity in just the last 15 years, this is a comparison of about 15 years ago to about today. And what you see is different types of jobs. The top rank of jobs are highly digital jobs. The next one is moderately digital jobs. And the third is the totally non-digital jobs. And you can also see the more digital a job is, the higher it pays because there's fewer people with these skills. So high digital jobs are things like computer programmers, data analysts, people who spend all their time working with software and computers. The moderately digital jobs include things like teachers or administrative assistants or so on, who need to be more and more facile with technology. Now imagine a kid who starts kindergarten today. They're going to graduate college in about 15 years. If you just think about what those graphs are going to look like 15 years from now, all those graphs are going to be pushing down. Almost half of all jobs are going to be highly digital jobs, and almost all jobs are going to be moderately digital. We don't need a crystal ball to imagine what that's going to look like. Even today, if you look at currently open jobs, the largest sector of currently open jobs in the country today is in computing. So the real question for us is, how do we represent this opportunity in our education system? And this isn't just about jobs in the tech sector or in Silicon Valley. 91% of software jobs are outside of Silicon Valley. 2/3 of them are outside of tech companies. There are companies like Walmart that now claims it's a tech company, or Arby's that now claims it's a tech company. These companies, every major industry needs computing potential. In Iowa today, there's 4,300 currently open jobs, representing $340 million in salaries. And these are jobs the state can't fill because there's not enough people with the skills for the jobs. Meanwhile, in Iowa, there were only 360 computer science graduates from university last year, and only 340 AP computer science students. Of those AP computer science students, only 20 were Hispanic or Latino, and only 10 were black. And those 30 underrepresented minorities have the opportunity to go after 4,000 of the highest paying jobs in the state. And part of the problem here is that only 30 schools in Iowa have been teaching AP computer science. Now that's roughly doubled since a year ago, thanks to the work of Codeorg and our partner Nuboco in Iowa. But this opportunity mismatch between where the jobs are and what the students are studying is upside down in every single state in the country. Now there's the question of what's the role of education in all this. I regularly talk about how all the debates in education today tend to be about how we teach. Debates about larger classrooms, smaller classrooms, more testing, less testing, unions versus charters versus vouchers. The real debate we should be having is about what we teach. Today, when you enter a classroom as a student, it feels like you're going into a time machine, going back 100 years to see, oh, this is what everybody used to learn in the 1900s. Let's learn that stuff. And it's part of why our students are disengaged. Now, I wear a hat that says code, and people imagine that I'm trying to say that we should all be teaching coding. My real message is our schools should be teaching computer science, which is broader than coding. Computer science includes computer programming or coding, computational thinking, data science, networking, cybersecurity, robotics, machine learning. That all these fields are new, and all these fields are going to be the foundation of what the future of all economies is going to be depending on. Every single industry is being changed by these technologies. Now, when I went to school and every student would go through learning the insides of the digestive system, how a light bulb works with electricity, or the Pythagorean theorem. You'd learn these things even if you didn't want to be a surgeon or an electrician. They're just part of understanding how the world works. And today, understanding how the world around us works is just as important to understand how an algorithm works or how the internet works. We use these things just as much. They're foundational for every student. In a world of accelerating technological change, probably the most important skill we can teach our students is going to be the ability to learn new technology. So as we think about this, we really need to think about how education needs to change to prepare and give students opportunity in a time of automation. The other important thing we need to think about is about diversity of the tech workforce. And if you think about where the future is going, this really is about diversity of the future workforce. Today, the tech workforce is predominantly made up of white boys who are from upper and upper middle class families, which means whether you're female, whether you're an underrepresented minority, or whether you came from a lower socioeconomic background, which added together, that's about 90% of people you're being left behind, and this one small 10% has access to these fields. If you look at diversity in the tech workforce, it's matched with what diversity looks like in university computer science programs, and it's matched with what it looks like in K through 12. The work of Codeorg and what we talk about is focused on K through 12 because all the data shows that if you get kids engaged, excited in the K through 12 system, they then carry on. That's when kids learn about their passions. Now, what we do about K through 12, the question is, our vision is that every student in every school should have the opportunity to learn computer science. You know, if you look at the parents, 90% of parents believe that they want their children to learn computer science in schools. 75% of Americans believe that computer science is cool in a way it wasn't 10 years ago. This is all basically an interest level that has been built up thanks to a lot of the work we've done to advocate for computer science. Students themselves rank computer science as their favorite subject behind only the arts. The problem, however, is that most schools don't teach computer science. And I should say, as the person who came up with the idea for the Hour of Code, most schools now do the Hour of Code, which is amazing. It's one of the coolest things in my life to have come up with an idea that is now 5 years later spread across the entire world. But the Hour of Code is not enough to teach a student computer science. We don't do just 1 hour of biology or 1 hour of math. We need the school system to treat computer science like an entire subject. And so the question is, how can we change the global education system, or at least Iowa's education system, to teach computer science as part of the school day? What we do at Codeorg is about a few things. The first is we produce free curriculum and offer free professional learning for teachers in our schools to be able to learn how to teach that curriculum, because you can't teach a class if you don't have teachers who have the preparation to teach it. We've also built a coding platform that makes learning much more accessible, easier for both the teacher and the student to get started and to learn. Starting as early as elementary school, students use drag and drop coding to do fun things that feel like a game to the kids, but that are teaching them the basics of computational thinking and algorithms. All the way through elementary school, we have 400 hours together of lessons going all the way to AP Computer Science. And in the AP class, they learn JavaScript coding, they learn how to make apps, they learn how to use robotics and physical computing. So there's an entire curriculum that's completely free now that can teach us at all grade spans. And one of the things to talk about with computer science is it makes school more fun. You know, a student in elementary school can write code to make that cool piece of art, and while they're doing that, they're learning about the angles in math. Or a student can make a game in middle school, or high school students are making an app in high school. The creativity that this harnesses really engages students. Besides our curriculum, we've also been working with districts, states, and federal government to change policies, including here in Iowa with the governor's support, to basically make computer science a fundamental part of the school day. And this is really possible. I want to tell the story of Oakland Unified School District. Oakland, 2 years ago, didn't have a single classroom that taught computer science. We went and trained math, science, history, and art teachers in every single school in the district. And now computer science was not only the 5th most popular exam, students passed the computer science exam at a higher rate than the math, history, science, or English exams, even though their teachers didn't have any experience in computer science before. And this isn't just a story in Oakland. This story is happening nationwide and even globally. This has been the most bipartisan, fastest growing movement in all education. I like to joke that that's a picture of teachers doing an hour of code, but that's a rock concert. But the reality is the number of teachers that have signed up for Codeorg in just the 5 years we've existed is 1,000 times the number of teachers you see in that picture because of the pace of this movement. This shows a graph of girls and minorities taking AP Computer Science. That growth there is completely, it's really unbelievable, and it's thanks to the work of America's schools. There's now over 27 million students on Codeorg. Almost half of them are girls, almost half of them are underrepresented minorities, almost half of them are students who can't even afford their lunch, and they're learning coding and computer science in schools. If you look at the things that they say, the students say that they love the experience, they want to do it over and over again, which is not what students say about regular classrooms. The teachers also say that the project was a slam dunk for students. The feedback from teachers is also amazing. This is something that started with teachers in the classroom deciding, I want to teach this in my school. Over a third of the schools in the country have now begun teaching computer science as a real course. Entire school districts have picked it up. Every single of the largest school districts in the country has now made a pledge to teach computer science. and 40 out of the 50 states have passed policies to teach computer science. 25 entire countries have now added it to their national curriculum. So it's clear that when students learn this in high school, they want to carry on. 70% of our AP students want to study computer science after graduation, but most schools still don't teach computer science. So if you're an educator here, or if you're close to an educator, please join the movement. Visit code.org and click on the Teach button to see how you can pick up the free curriculum or go to a workshop near you. And if you're not an educator, you can go to code.org and help us as well. So thank you very much for your time.
So Hadi, we've got just a few questions for you. Codeorg, as you indicated, has introduced young students to computer science skills. What advice do you have in terms of exposing more students to computer science, and especially students of color?
Well, by far the most important thing is to teach it in schools. When computer science is taught as an after-school club or in summer camps, the kids that go to those things end up getting exposed, and the most needy kids are the ones whose stereotypes makes them think that this is not for me, don't get to learn it. When it comes to underrepresented students of color, one of the most depressing things is that black students, when you survey them, are more interested in learning computer science than white students. They're less likely to have it offered at their school. So offering this course in schools is the most important step we can take.
Do you see having all female classes as an answer to getting girls more interested in computer science in high school?
So this is a great question. It's very clear the data shows that stereotypes do hold back a lot of women from going to computer science, which is kind of actually the opposite of what it is for underrepresented minorities. And there's lots of efforts to have clubs for girls to learn together to basically get rid of those inhibitions, but that's not the only answer. Teaching it at a younger age can also counteract those stereotypes. So for us, as you saw from the slide I showed, 45% of the students on code.org are girls, which is pretty close to balanced. And we in our data don't see any difference in terms of their achievement or the pace of learning because it's being taught in the classroom starting at an early age.
We've been talking about skilled trades as a way to strengthen our state. How does automation impact those efforts?
It's hard to predict how automation is going to change jobs. So I don't know if I can specifically answer with one single answer, but what I can certainly say is if you think about how much automation is going to change work, the type of work that is definitely not going away is learning how to automate other work. That's the one type of work that is going to be the last one to get automated. So if you want to prepare for the future, learning how technology works is probably the most secure type of job you could have.
What would you advise Iowa to do as the next step to support the teaching of computer science in our schools?
That's a great question. My first next step would be if you're an educator, start teaching computer science or ask your principal to give you permission to go attend a workshop to learn computer science and make it part of the school program. And this doesn't mean just an hour of code. As the guy who started the hour of code, I'm also the loudest spokesperson for saying that's not enough. And this isn't just something to wait for administrations or the government to tell schools to do. Individual schools all around the country have decided we're going to fit this in and make this work. But for the entire state, the other next step is for the state to expand on the funding it's already made available for professional development, to increase that funding and make a state plan for when every school teaches computer science. Just in the last 2 weeks, we've had Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, Wyoming, Indiana have all increased their funding for computer science. Idaho, Wyoming, and Indiana just declared that every single school in the state must teach computer science, following the lead of Governor Asa Hutchinson. This is something that isn't just happening in a few states. 15 different states have added funding for computer science. Over 20 states are establishing standards. Iowa's in the mix of doing those things, but I wouldn't say that it's at the front of the pack, and it can catch up at the state level for doing those things. But the top thing that will convince the state and the government to do that is if the schools are naturally adopting it as well, because governments don't want to force something on schools that the schools aren't ready for. So if you're an educator, getting ahead of the game is the way to do it, because that's also going to motivate the government to do this as well.
Very good. Well, I wish we had more time. We've got a lot more questions, but we thank you very much. Let's give a warm welcome, or thank you to Hadi Partovi.